Hey everybody, JJ Barrows here with the Jest of It podcast. I am out in the middle of nature. I don't exactly know where. Where are we?
Wyoming.
We are currently in Wyoming, the great state of Wyoming. Who knew it was so great? Probably lots of people. I did not until I got here. It's phenomenal. We spent the last 2 or 3 days in the Grand Tetons. That's my friend, Raven. That's so Raven. Literally, because we're out in nature. Where was I? The Grand Tetons. Anybody know what it stands for? If you can tell me what it stands for, I will send you one of my t-shirts. You can pick which one you want. Your pick of my art collection. Yep, he knows. The campground that we stayed at the Grand Tetons was a first come, first served basis. So we actually had to get in line at 4:30 in the morning to reserve a campsite. And there were already 4 cars waiting ahead of us. So it kind of blew my mind, actually, to think about that people would get up that early to wait in line to sleep on the ground and pay for it. I haven't really figured out how I feel about this whole camping thing yet. But it's been interesting. And we just got done seeing Yosemite. Nope, not Yosemite. What's the other Y one? Yellowstone. Saw a bunch of old geezers. Geysers. Let's be honest, both were there. If you're watching by YouTube, you get to see some of the background here. It's glorious. It's amazing. We're definitely in the middle of no service. So fortunately, this episode that I get to share with you today has already been recorded. Actually, I'm really excited to share this episode with you because it was the first episode I recorded with my good friend, Melissa Lima. Very kind of her to navigate the awkwardness of a first podcast recording. So before this bird completely takes over the program, because I'm starting to think he likes the sound of his own voice, I'm going to introduce you to this podcast. So, like I said, this episode was the first episode I recorded, and it was super fun to get to talk to Melissa. I met her when I moved to Santa Barbara, probably my first and only real close friend in Santa Barbara. So she was born in Los Angeles, but she was raised in New Hampshire, and her parents were immigrants. They immigrated here from Guatemala. I have my producer over here correcting me, a.k.a. my driver, a.k.a. my husband, a.k.a. Josh. So Melissa, she also goes by Lima. Lima experienced the power of stories through her parents because growing up, they would always tell her about Guatemala. And they actually learned to speak English by watching television. So Lima very much grew up around the television, and a lot of their family times and memories and bonding experiences were around the TV through watching sitcoms, through watching telenovelas and movies. Essentially, these are the memories that she has of having good times with her families and of learning English. So I love that aspect. That is probably what contributed to her being a storyteller that she is. She does have a background in higher education. She's worked in the nonprofit sector as well, but she is very passionate about storytelling, about producing, writing, both for TV and for film. She's also produced over 26 comedy shows in Santa Barbara with Don't Tell Comedy, if you've never heard of it before. Pre-COVID, don't really know how well they're doing now. Don't do comedy. It might be what they're doing now. Don't do live shows. I don't know. So though we're in some weird times with COVID, she hopes to write and create television that tells the stories of the heart of humanity and the power of representation. I love it. That captures her and her heart to a T and what she hopes to accomplish as she walks about this earth. Isn't that such an interesting task we all have? Figure out what it is we're to do here and how we can bring more value to it. So she's one of those people who's working diligently to figure that out, especially in this post-COVID world, which is not easy. So sit back, relax, and listen to Lemon Juice by Melissa Lima.
Have you ever experienced a time where you were lucky, but then you were unlucky? Or when you thought, hey, everything was great and everything was clear, but then life decided to chuck lemons at you? Well, let me just tell you a story. One evening, I actually lost my iPad. And for some of you, you may think, it's just an iPad, chill out, you're fine. But for the other of you who actually pay rent in California, Santa Barbara specifically, why would you waste something expensive like that? Like, don't you realize money don't grow on trees? For me, it was a chill Sunday evening. I was planning on getting some dinner by myself because I'm single. It's fine. I'm trying to navigate that. It's fine. But I also do some errands, just a night on the town. I was carrying multiple bags because I tend to have this crazy bag lady status where I just carry multiple bags to my car thinking I'm the Incredible Hulk. In the midst of everything, I was throwing everything in. A friend of mine actually decided to hit me up for dinner. So I realized, oh, great. Because originally I was carrying my iPad along with me to read some books on the Kindle, right? Free books. Again, living in Santa Barbara, trying to make a budget. I get down to downtown Santa Barbara, and, I realized then that my iPad actually wasn't in the car. I thought to myself, you know what? It's probably still at the house. Again, running late to dinner, didn't think to any more seconds about it. Finished my errands, got home, put things away. And then I thought to myself, I should really look for my iPad. Where is my iPad? So, ran up the stairs, looked around my room. Where is my iPad? Looked under the covers because, sometimes things get lost in your bed. Where is my iPad? Looked under my bed. No. Kitchen. So I ran downstairs. No, kitchen counters are all clear. Where is my iPad? I found myself just staring at the breadcrumbs at the kitchen counter like it was the Ouija board trying to send me a message from beyond. Like, your iPad is here. Nothing. Okay, well, maybe it actually is in the car. So I ran into my car, looked under my seat. No. Old Starbucks coffee cup. Where is my iPad? At this point, anxiety was starting to sit in. And I was like, oh no. I thought the worst. Of course, because I automatically think the worst in these things. So what do when I panic? I call my bestie. Hey, she answered. I could tell she already had a glass of wine in her hand. Oh my God, I think someone already stole my iPad. All right, I'm going to need you to walk me through this, she replied. So in between the snob and the snot and the droll, because, let's just be real, I recounted the story of how I couldn't find my iPad. I looked everywhere. It must have gotten stolen because downtown Santa Barbara is not actually really dangerous. But in my head, it was, right? She took a minute. I could hear her take a sip of her wine. It's just an iPad. Very comforting to hear. She continued on. This is hitting something much deeper. And it was then that I just felt it. You see, the iPad, it was just... you're right. It was just an iPad, but it was something much more. I used it to watch TV on Netflix or Hulu. And television is a thing. You see, my parents actually immigrated from Guatemala. And one of the ways that they learned English and the USA culture was watching TV. My mom is a domestic worker. And what she would do is she would iron or clean up the house or whatever with the TV in the background. It was either Little House of the Prairie or General Hospital, find balance and things. And so as I grew up, television was one of the ways that we gathered together as a family. From Sanford and Son to the Golden Girls to Three's Company. It was just a way for us to get together and just laugh because life was already hard enough. Man, where was my iPad? The second thought that came across my head as I was sobbing was money. You see, I didn't have a laptop at the time because I was unemployed. And so my iPad was the only way for me to have a connection to the outside world, along with the phone, right? But this iPad was a gift from my father. A couple Christmases ago, he handed me the package. And he said, something to help you fulfill your dreams and your goals. As I unwrapped it, I just felt my heart sinking deeper and deeper because I realized this was no cheap gift. And I realized how many 12-hour shifts he had to work to get me this gift. He knew that that gift would be used, and so it was. So, coming back to it, she replied back, normally you would be like, those fools stole my iPad, and then you would get over it. But I know there's something deeper in here for you. So after I took a couple deep breaths, and after we had a couple inside joke laughs, I felt a little better. Because I knew it wasn't the iPad that I was grieving. I was grieving that loss of connection with my dad. I was grieving the harsh reality of how hard it was to live in a place so glorious of Santa Barbara, where I was barely making ends meet after working 3-4 jobs. I was grieving the fact that my parents, still a domestic worker and a machinist, were working 12-hour shifts just to make it. I was grieving the fact that student loans were still haunting me to this day. I was grieving the fact that people were still trying to cross over to make it here in the land of the free and home of the brave. I was grieving all of that. Man, where is my iPad? So fast forward to the next day, puffy-eyed, I walked into work. It's just an iPad, I kept saying to myself over and over again. I worked through the grief, but I also worked through the realities that I was navigating. I could just envision my iPad with the clear cover on it, some of it scratched up, with the map on the case, because I thought I'm going to travel the world. Man, where's my iPad? I thought to myself at the end of the day. Driving home, I decided, you know what? It's enough is enough. It's just an iPad. As I drove up the hill to my home, I saw the sun kiss the ocean, and I realized I'll be okay. It will be fine. Instead of asking, where's my iPad, I should ask, where's my heart? Parked in the driveway, I wiped gratitude tears from my eyes and smiled to myself. It will be okay. Got out of my car with my bags, locked the car, took a deep breath, and casually just looked over to my right. And there was my iPad lying face down on the ground. I laughed to myself. And then I did a quick prayer to the apple gods asking, oh, please, oh, please, oh, please, oh, please be still intact. I ran over, squatted down, and slowly lifted the iPad and looked under. It was perfect. So happy. I ran up the stairs, praising the apple gods. And I threw my bags on the bed. I was so excited. Everything was coming to light. My TV shows, books, the email, everything. Access to all the resources that my parents didn't have were coming back to me. Relieved, feeling a tiny bit foolish, but relieved. I smiled, plugged my iPad back in the charger, walked over to my work bag, picked it up from my bed, and realizing it was dripping. Oh. Reached into the bag. I picked out the water bottle, half empty. Reached back into the bag, pulled out the work laptop, and realized it was dripping. And I just started to laugh.
Yes. I also started to laugh. First of all, thank you for sharing that. But I have to know, because the story, when I read through the story the first time and it says the water bottle and it was just dripping and it ended. And I was like, what happened to the laptop? Did it ruin it or did it mess up the laptop?
Yeah, so it messed it up.
Oh my gosh. That's a perfect ending though, because it leaves you like,
what happened? Yeah.
Wait, what? What I love about this story is like, it's just so much like life, how there's ups and downs and there's, you know, the frustration, the loss or whatever with whatever that thing might be in life. But in this particular story with the iPad and everything revolved around that. Yeah. And then in the moment that everything seems like, oh, it's all better now. It's never, ever happily ever after. It's like, boom. And then the next thing. And I don't mean that in like a pessimistic way, just in a realistic way. Yeah. That life just, it ebbs and flows. And so I love how you didn't end the story just on this like happy high note of like, and now everything's all better. Like, everything was restarting and your iPad was coming back to life. And then all of a sudden, oh my God, I ruined the laptop.
Yeah, it's really funny. So it's funny because I usually actually say the title of the reason why lemon juice, and I didn't this time. It just didn't happen. But I did reference the lemons. I know it comes and sometimes it doesn't. It's just as a storyteller, you just kind of feel the moment. Sometimes you don't even feel the lemons hitting you. It's just the juice that's hitting you sometimes. And so that's why I originally named it. And it's like, you know, sometimes I'll integrate it and saying like learning to like, you were basking in the lemon juice this definitely, the whole iPad incident was the lemon juice that you're just sitting in because it seeped deeper than just getting hit with the iPad missing. It was deeper than that. It was like my loss of connection to, I felt like to my dad, even, I mean, he's fine, you know, and I can call him and stuff like that. But it was like that thing where I knew that he worked so hard to get me, you know, and it was access to TV shows, access to books that I wanted to read, like stories and stuff like that. Like it was just a thing where it's like, no, this is something deeper. It's just an iPad, you know, and so that's why like I liked to I named it lemon juice because it's deeper than just the lemon that's throwing at you. It's like no, you're sitting in it. You know,
I love that. I'm just sharing your info because part of what I loved about this story was literally like what you just explained.
is it's so easy to get caught up in, even if someone's trying to be encouraging, like, oh, it's just a thing, like it can't replace people, it's just an iPad. Like, sure, that's an expensive thing, but at the end of the day, look on the bright side, it's just a thing. And there is a truth to that. Yes, like I have my health and I have all these things to be grateful for, but it's okay to grieve, the loss of something, even if the loss of something is an inanimate object, and especially if that inanimate object is representative of something so much more, which is obviously what that was for you. And as storytellers, I think people who love stories, we do tend to be people that cling to things, not in because the thing in and of itself has value, but because of what that thing represents. And for you having to do so much with your history and your family, and even what it meant for your dad to get that iPad for you, both in the act of him working hard and spending the money on the gift, and of what he didn't have and where he came from, and you having access to that. And so it's just crazy to look at from a different perspective of, oh, this person didn't just lose an object, my good intention is to console, but how can I step back and like experience something from someone else's point of view? So I love you sharing that, because awareness, I feel like, is something that a lot of people struggle with, myself included, these days. And I feel like you have a unique experience, especially living in Santa Barbara. Living in Santa Barbara, which is very, how can I politely say it, vanilla. And it's its own little vanilla bubble a lot of the times. And you have such an awareness of the abundance that you're surrounded by, but you also have such an awareness of the lack of having less than. How would you say, like, for you personally, functioning as a woman of color in Santa Barbara, is that an awareness that you've just always been aware of, like by default, like you've just always been aware that there's something different or something feels different? Or was that something that you were taught to be aware of or encouraged not to be aware of? So I hear different stories how some people are like, no, like we're not different, we're all, which is, there can be truths to different sort of perspectives, but I'm just always curious as to what someone's experience is. What is it like for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. First, I didn't grow up in Santa Barbara, so I moved here 2014. So I already grew up as an adult.
Yeah.
And I grew up, in different parts of the USA. I was born in LA, but I was raised in New England and then Texas for a good chunk of my life. And actually, my parents still live in Texas. So I came out to Santa Barbara when I had a career opportunity out here. And then it just kind of morphed into where I am now, currently my home. And so, which is something I'd never imagined to be, because when you come to Santa Barbara, see Santa Barbara, you don't really, it's a very touristic place. It come off as paradise, and it's beautiful, and we have wine, and we have the beaches, and
sun-kissed oceans,
and that's all great. And I mean, that's partly the draw of when I had the career opportunity to come up here. I'm like, oh, I'm going to Santa Barbara. So there was that draw. But I think to answer another part of your question is like the awareness of the realities that I was carrying because of the narratives that I carry. Like, I'm a daughter of immigrants. I'm the first in my family to go to college. I'm the first in my family to get a master's. We grew up in a low social economic status. And just like, undocumented status is mixed within my family, my extended family, and everything. So that is another reality that we are navigating. It definitely was something that I was raised to be aware of. We never went on family vacations. We never did any of that because we would pinch our pennies to go back to Guatemala like every 2 or 3 years growing up. So my parents wanted me to know where I came from. And that is something I hold very dear now. And I'm very grateful that they did that. But like as a kid, I was like, I want to go to Disneyland. Like, because you just hear everyone else doing that. But my parents are like, no, like, we're going to go visit your grandparents, you know, like mi tierra, like my home, their home. And so as a grown up, I now so appreciate that, because it was actually through that experience that I learned, A, how privileged I was to be born in the USA and to have access to education and resources, and then B, of just like the harsh realities that my parents had navigated to get to the USA. And so I was definitely, I was exposed to a lot, you know. And I mean, Guatemala is no walk in the park. It's a very beautiful country and there's so many things, but I also learned of a lot of inequities there too, the harsh realities that the indigenous population is there too. And so my parents were very intentional of not shielding me from that from a very young age. And being sometimes the only Latina, especially growing up in New England, I was sometimes the only Latina in my class, as like, even as, you know, like from first grade all the way up. And so that was something that I had to navigate too. So it was like two different worlds that I was walking in, of like being the only one, but at the same time also realizing that I am more privileged than my family in some cases. And so it was this weird balance beam that I was going back and forth. Here in Santa Barbara, to answer your first question, is it's definitely, there are days where it is just very tiring, just because, again, it's a very touristy place, so it draws on that. That's where the most of the economy comes from, is from the hospitality industry. So it is a blessing and a curse, because all these folks come in, but all the folks that come in with money definitely is generally, and the majority is one population, right? And so, and those who are serving these people are another population, which are the brown and black folks. So there's that dynamic too, that sometimes it's hard to navigate, because I identify with those who are serving, but I also have some opportunity, not all opportunities, of those who are being served. It definitely, there is a tension there. There are homeless people here in Santa Barbara. There are people who are in poverty. There are people who need help. We have one of the largest nonprofit sectors here in Santa Barbara. And so there's a lot of hurting people who need resources. I actually used to work in the nonprofit sector, so I just heard a lot of stories and know of a lot of stories. These past 6 years, it's like knowing all those stories and hearing all those stories, but then also people are like, oh, we go to Santa Barbara where Oprah and Ellen lives. And it's like, yes, but there's a tension and it gets hard. And there's some days where I just need to go down to LA to be with the rest of my family, just to get out of that bubble.
Do you feel like you've had to initiate those conversations? Because I know, like, for me in particular, at least in the time of this recording, the climate that we're in, you know, there's a lot of racial tension for sure, but awareness is a word that keeps coming up, and lack of awareness. And even for someone, for myself, who thought she was so aware, in this season of life, learning more and more, like there's stuff that I wasn't even aware of, because I think it's just so easy for people to just, especially here, to just kind of grow up in their experience of life. And because I experienced it like this must just be how it is. And if I'm hearing about trouble over here, it must be because y'all have problems over here. But it's not related to me. Does that make sense?
No, yeah, it makes sense. My parents are the first people to teach me about inequities and racism, how to navigate the world that was not set up for success, like people like us. They came to this country. My mom was 15 and my dad was 21. And they actually met here. They definitely had to grow up fast, and they definitely had to learn the system and learn how to make it here. But the reason why they came here was because of the things that were happening down in Guatemala. They were the first people to tell me why things were the way they were. And so when I went to college and graduate school, like, I was able to actually gain the language and the facts and the resources and the education and all that to do the work that some people are actually now starting to do. I did find myself a lot in those conversations, asking questions or being clarified, and to push back and even advocating. And I always found myself in the advocate role, saying, this is not right, this is unjust, or, you know, things need to be different, things need to be better. In my role as a higher education, I was an educator in that role. I had the liberty to use that platform to come alongside students who were learning about their identity identity, whether they were white, brown, black, whatever, to come alongside of them to understand the theory and developmental tools that they needed to continue to move forward. And the hard part is, like, even, the administrators and other folks as well were learning how to do that too. So I found myself a lot in those roles, but I also found myself that I still need to do the work. And even still to this day, I need to do the work of what it means to be privileged, but then also what it means to be a woman of color, and how do I navigate those tensions. So here in Santa Barbara, as a Santa Barbara as a local, it does take work to develop community, because there are people that are doing the work. There are people that are invested in the community, that are people that want to see Santa Barbara do better. I'm very blessed and privileged to know a couple of the community leaders who have led the protests, but it definitely can be really tiring and exhausting because, again, it's the other side of things, of the housing issue, the housing crisis, the homeless issue that's happening. Rent is increasing, but our pay is the same. Those are other inequities that we're still navigating to this day. And then there's some folks that don't want to engage in it at all. And they're just like, it's fine or whatever. And they either have the resources to give, financial resources, and they're like, well, I gave, so I'm going to go drink my wine. And it's like, it's one of those things where it's definitely has taken some wisdom. It definitely has taken some time, but also some awareness on what's going on with that person, and also the environment and the context. And there's some times where I'm just like, no, I'm gonna lean into this conversation. And then there's some times where I'm like, this person is not ready to have this conversation. And for me, who's exhausted, or for me, for where I'm at, it's probably not best right now, because I actually may not be heard, because I would just come off as too angry, because I'm always fighting against that angry Latina. And so unfortunately, that's a stereotype. And so I need to be aware of how I am presenting myself, so I may be heard. And that's just a whole nother narrative that I have to carry. And so, it's one of those things where people who are just now growing in the awareness, people who are now just waking up, I'm like, good for you, keep going. But again, it's like one of those things where I hope that the work continues to happen, because for those of us who have our eyes open, who have been doing this work, who have been advocating, who have been really pushing things to be better, we're finally saying, like, it's about time that you woke up. So
yeah, I like how you said you can be aware, you feel very strongly about something, but you're aware that in the situation that you're in, depending on who you're talking with, it might not be the right time or place for you to express the depth to which you feel that, because they'll only be reacting to or responding to your emotion or your anger that's coming out, as opposed to the actual issue, which sometimes gets lost in the emotion, which I feel like is a lot of what's happening right now. There's so many emotions, not that they're wrong, not that the emotions are wrong.
No.
But the way that they're being expressed, people are just responding to people's emotions, that the actual issues have somehow gotten lost in between the emotions, and now everyone's just kind of defending, their feelings.
It starts within ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
It starts with us realizing how we look like, the color of our skin, and our status, and what that means society. But then we have to also internalize that ourselves and work through that. And I like what you said, like, the emotions are not that wrong. I think how we react to their emotions, it could be wrong, or how we navigate those emotions. But the emotions is part of the process of understanding our status and our identity in society. And so that's why it's so important that we continue to seek this in a healthy, and it could be, confrontational. I know that some people are scared to say that, but sometimes confrontational needs to happen in order for us to be aware of what's going on. With the awareness that we start within ourselves and navigating that, then we're able to enter into a conversation and also learn that they may be in the same stage that we are at. As, either a white person or a person of color in society, you may be farther along in your developmental stage, but then this person may be like not, and they're just starting out. And so what they're saying reflects where they are developmentally, and what you're saying reflects you are developmentally. And then those messages are not even meeting, right? But when we're so stuck in this like stage of like, well, I'm right, and I've been woke this whole time, like you just see this, you're not seeing this. Or like the other person's like, there's not a problem, I give to Black Lives Matter, then they're all going to see this and they're not going to see this.
Right.
So that's where a lot of the conflict happens. And of course, like not listening and being kind, but that is one part of it that I try to practice all the time. And that's because I just had the privilege of education to understand that. The more that we educate ourselves, the more awareness, the more we do that, then we start to understand, oh, being a human is complicated.
Yeah, so complicated. Oh my gosh. That's a really good way to put it. That's a good subtitle for something. Being human is complicated. Today, I think what people need to do is listen to people's stories. Was there ever like an aha moment for you that was like, oh, storyteller, this is what I am?
I didn't know that like you can call yourself a storyteller and that means so many different things till like 4 or 5 years, like not like till recently. Because I thought in my head, like, no, that's someone who writes books, like a novelist or whatever, right? I didn't realize storyteller was such a like a broad umbrella thing. I mean, growing up, I was like that person who was on a first name basis with the librarian. Like I was that I was that person.
I love it.
So being the only Latina growing up in New Hampshire, mind you, it was hard for me to have friends. I was bullied a lot. I had a rough childhood. And so I just found my escape in books. Like the characters in the books became my friends. And of course, I grew up with TV. And so, those people became my friends. And then I found myself very engrossed in those worlds and both parents working. And I remember like the second jobs, they would go and clean offices. And so my parents would take me, plop me on an office couch, and I had to take a book or a coloring book or something to entertain myself. I was really young. And so I had to just figure it out on my own to entertain myself. And so I was always engrossed in those worlds because that was the best way that I could cope to navigate what was actually really going on. So I would eat books like crazy. Like my dad would buy me like these, like, I don't know, through like the Scholastic little like book fair book.
Yeah, I used to love those.
Oh my gosh.
I
would like
throwback.
circle. Yeah, so many. So my dad would buy like the summer like reading package thing, and it would come with like just a whole bunch of activity books and all these books and everything. And I would just finish them within like the first month of summers. Again, going back to like going to Guatemala every couple of years, like I would ask why, and my parents would tell me why. And through telling me, they would tell the stories. They would tell stories of how it was to grow up on like, my great grandparents' house with all the mango trees and the lemon trees and lemon. They were away from their home. They never felt like home. And so that's how they like relived home. And then we were far away from our family in LA. And so they would tell me stories about my grandparents and my tias and my tios because they wanted me to continue to be connected to them. So my parents are actually really, I think they're like probably better storytellers than anyone because to continue that spirit of alive of like, this is where we're from. And so continuing to tell the stories made it more real for us. And so I really gleaned it from them, the power of stories. And then once I got into higher education, I learned how like college students developed and identity developed and how humans worked and how we think. And then I ended up doing my thesis, which is actually Latinx students going to a Latin American Studies Abroad program. And it was qualitative. So qualitative research is actually you're collecting stories from students and finding common themes. And out of those themes, you are drawing conclusions from that. And so again, I was drawn to that more research of like, I want to hear the stories of the students because that's where you can find little truths coming out of their stories. Little did I realize it was like the storyteller in me. Whenever I would advocate for students, I found that I would pull from the students' stories of like, well, let me tell you a story of this student. Let me tell you a story of this student. So there was like this yearning in me to like express myself creatively. And I didn't know what that was. I am a Latin dancer. I love salsa, bachata, all that. And that's what I do for fun. And like, oh my gosh, with the pandemic, I'm going crazy because I can't dance with anyone. But I mean, that's what I do like to express myself. But I knew there was something else. And so actually it wasn't until a couple of years ago, I took like a storytelling class. I didn't know what it was. I just envisioned this like old man with like a staff, like Moses, just telling the story about like mythical creatures. But then once I learned what it actually was and the power behind that, I was starting to pull pieces from my life of like, oh, it started from my parents, it started from my family, it started from my love of reading, all these different things. And I'm like, oh, and then I find myself integrating these life experiences and finding myself pulling out like lessons and messages through that. And so I did my first performance, actually like a storytelling performance. And it was about salsa dancing and how I found salsa dancing to be my like safe place here in Santa Barbara because it was majority Latinx, but there was also just a whole bunch of diverse people coming through, and you could be like a lawyer, and you could be, you know, a custodial worker, you can be a secretary, you know, all these different things, but you come together and you're just dancing with each other. And so I drew the story about like, it doesn't matter what background you're from, it doesn't matter what language you speak, we all speak the language of dance. And that connection as humans. And so I did that performance and I danced while I told that story. I just like felt the most alive then. I was like, ah, and like the angels sang and the light shined. And I was like, this is my life's calling. I knew it. And so through that, I was encouraged more and more just to continue to write. So I just now, I've performed around here in Santa Barbara, just a couple like storytelling events, and which has allowed me to connect to other people on a different level. Being a human is complicated, but telling a story is connecting.
Because we all have a story, and it's so true. Like, there is power in stories, and there's power in people hearing people's stories, and there's power in people telling their stories. And so I think to find yourself in a place where you can engage in the act of that and feel what, like, I love how you said you performed and you told and you had this outlet, you know, to express your creativity and you felt alive. Like, I think that right there, people need to do more things that make them feel alive. Because when you feel alive and you know your worth and your value as a person, you are more likely to care about the worth and the value and the story of someone else. Yeah, that's just a good word, even for people to take away. Whether it's a storytelling class or whether it's something else, find something to engage in that makes you feel alive. Yes, for your own sake, but also because it's going to do wonders for the way in which you see other people, because you're like, oh, I'm good. How are you? So with that said, like this idea of like takeaway, what would you say is like, whether it's the gist of the story or what you would want someone to take away from it or to learn or to hear or to know or to feel, if anything, what would be your why in sharing this particular story?
Life is always going to throw you lemons. It's whether or not like how you're going to navigate that, that's what makes the difference, and that what makes the impact. And so my hope is that anyone who hears this story realizes if there is a reaction or an emotion that's being caused at the lemon thrown at you, take the time to explore that and be kind to yourself, because it's more than just an iPad. It's more than just a lemon.
That's so good. It's so good too, like even just to think about when you see someone freaking out about something, and to you it might seem like not a big deal.
Yeah,
it's just such a it's just such a good reminder. Like, it's not just about, we only see what's on the surface, right? And so take the time to listen or to ask. It does more harm to not validate someone's reality, to not validate someone's pain, and the only way you can do that is to hear the why.
There's always a why. It's just an iPad. We can get you another one. We'll fundraise. It doesn't matter. You're going to be okay. But like, there's still that, like, but that was the iPad that my dad bought me. That was the iPad that he worked so hard for. He's been working hard his whole life. You know, it's just like, you know, so.
It's huge. That's so good. I love it. And so then for the gist of it, it is important for us to feel, but it's also important for us to not drown in the feelings. So once you've felt those feelings, what does it look like to not drown in those feelings? Where would you start to look for or find humor in life or the lighter side of things?
Oh, I love comedy. I love humor. I practice looking at the irony of life. I practice on changing the perspective on it. I mean, that just requires a lot of practice, and look at the circumstance. And sometimes it's just really funny. And so it is, because it's just so ironic and funny. And so, and I love that that happened to me at the end with the laptop, because it's just like, well, I have two choices. I can cry again because I ruined a work laptop, or I can laugh at this because of course this would happen to me. You know, and so once I practice to take myself out of this view and look at the home circumstances, it's like, oh, that's hilarious. And so where I found humor in life is just you embrace irony and you learn to find irony in that circumstances wherever you go. And here's another thing is you have to learn to laugh at yourself. You have to, because if you can't laugh at yourself, then it's not fair that you have to laugh at someone else. That's just not fair. So laugh at yourself and be kind to yourself. That's one way of showing kindness to yourself, is laughing at yourself. Because again, being human is complicated. If you can't laugh at yourself, then
it's going to be a rough life.
It's going to be a rough life.
That's so good. Kind of a final question. In the day and age in which we're in, I feel like two things are super important for people to become more aware and for people to be able to laugh at themselves, right? Again, this tension of it's not just as simple as, let's just pretend like nothing's happening and laugh and entertain and da-da-da-da-da.
Right.
But it also, like, to be in a place of dealing with hard, tough stuff, you have to have a breathing space where you can go and just relax and laugh and write. So there's this balance. So that said, what 2 things would you recommend to people right now? 1, for awareness, whether it's or something to read or something to watch. And 2, lighthearted for funny, to get a laugh or just a breather.
Okay, so I think for awareness, one of the top movies to watch is Just Mercy, hands down. We read the book, and then like Brian Stevenson, he came and spoke at UCSB and did a couple events in town. And so that definitely contributed to my education and that. But the movie is just as powerful, and Michael B. Jordan is just amazing, and Jamie Foxx is just amazing. And so I definitely highly recommend Just Mercy. And the second one is When They See Us by Ava DuVernay. How do you say her last name? By Ava. I'm sorry.
When They See Us.
When They See Us on Netflix. Very powerful. And a lot of people are like, I can't handle seeing it. And it's just one of those things where it's like, I understand that.
Yeah, it's a hard truth.
It's a hard truth. And those are people's everyday lives.
Yeah.
It is what it is.
That's good. And those are really good heavy ones. So
yeah,
I'm to balance it.
I'm a feeler, so I'll go there with you guys.
For sure. No, I'm on the same page. So that's good. That's good for the first part. Second part, now for the lighthearted, the funny, like where people could just go and get a breather or get a laugh.
I love Schitt's Creek. It's
yes. It's so good.
It's the name of the show, guys.
It's the name of the show. She's not swearing. SCHITT.
Apostrophe S Creek. Creek. It's created by Eugene Levy, Dan Levy. I just love the writing. It's so witty. It's so smart. It's brilliant. But also the sweetness of family love. But it's just like you are annoyed with the characters, but you're not. And you see just like these folks develop and to become better versions of themselves, but still like authentic to who they are. And it's just 30 minutes of just pure joy. And he'll like,
so good.
It's so good.
Not that you need me to, but I approve of that answer. That's a good answer. Yeah, it's a good mix of so funny and lighthearted and frustration with family, but loving each other, like just being family.
Love each other. Yeah, and like it's just the whole town learns to love them and accept them for who they are. And
yeah, I love it. So if people want to look for you or find you or see what stories you're sharing, posting about, they can find you on Instagram, right, at Melissa S. Lima. And thank you so much for sharing your story with us today and being just virtually present in a post-pandemic world. Are we post yet or are we still in the middle of it? But thank you for sharing your perspective and your story and your experience and just being willing to share your time with us. I super appreciate you taking the time to do it.
Yeah, thank you for letting me share.
This is where the outro music plays. I don't know if we'll have outro music.
You should.
Hey guys, thanks so much for listening to this episode with Melissa. I loved this story in part because it's not like it's just a recap of her life story, which she has plenty of stories from her life, but it's just telling a piece of it. Something that we can all relate to, losing something, losing an item, losing something that if anyone were to try to console us, right, the natural thing would be to say, oh, it's just a thing. It's okay. Ultimately, not all is lost. And while that's true, I love that for her, it had such representation of her family, of her upbringing, of all the hard work that her dad put in, not only to provide an atmosphere where they were able to watch television as a means to learn, but also to provide entertainment as a form of relief from an already tough life. And so it just goes to show we never really know what's going on with people, right? It's so easy just to be like, oh, they're complaining about this, or oh, they lost that big deal. But you never really know what's going on underneath or what meaning something has to somebody. And so we should never just assume and we should never just dismiss someone's reality of something being hard, even if it doesn't seem as hard to us. So thank you, Melissa, for sharing that. I do love how she very specifically titled this story Lemon Juice, essentially to be about life throwing so many lemons at you that it creates this juice. And originally when she told the story on the podcast, I think she forgot to actually mention lemon juice or lemons in general. So we kind of had a laugh about that afterwards. And instead of re-recording it, we just said, nah, let's leave it. Let's just go to show. Not everything has to be perfectly produced all the time. And that's just life. That's life chucking a lemon at you right there. So it does tie up perfectly. So thank you so much for listening to this episode. Again, if you want to find Melissa on social media, you can find her on Instagram, Melissa S. Lima, as well as Spotify. She puts out Spotify playlists. If you're ever looking for music, I love music. I'm not always able to create the list myself. So I love actually when people, I was about to say procreate, pre-create, pre-make. That's the word. A list of music that's already there for me to listen to and enjoy. So find her on Spotify as well. Thanks again for listening. Again, check us out on YouTube. Check us out on Instagram. Check out my art shop if you want to continue to support the artists. And hey, if you're listening and you think of someone that has a story to tell, or you have a story to tell, again, it doesn't have to be a life story summary. It can be a experience, a one-off. It can be someone that you heard tell a story once and you're like, oh, that guy, he has the best stories. Let me know. Email me, the jestofitwithjj@gmail.com. Thanks so much. That's me reporting from Wyoming. Who knows where we'll be next? Tune in next week to find out.
This life is beautiful, brilliant like the sun. The sun is dancing and the waves are having fun. I may seem different, like I've lost my mind, but I am comfortable and I'm feeling fine. It makes me go